You are here for Teams 5.3 with Mahalia Baldini. I am Krista Mosier with Train PD at TCall, and with me for backup and tech support is Anne-Marie Molinari-Sanders and Tracy Hendricks. All right, I'm going to let Mahalia Baldini have it, our Texas Workforce Commission AEL State Director.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here because we have got a lot on the agenda today, as always. And I wanted to go over just a few things before we get started. I'm going to spend the first 30 minutes of today's session just kind of going through a PowerPoint and doing a good little refresher from the previous session that I had on the pre-post test gains pages. And then we will move into what I hope will be a live training environment sort of look. So that is sort of the plan for today. I'm also going to ask, and let me get my PowerPoint pulled up here. I'm also going to ask that you put your questions into the chat for today's meeting. And then when I get to the end of the PowerPoint section, then I will answer questions because I want to try to get through everything, and maybe I'll answer some of your questions along the way just because we're on a pretty limited time frame for what I hope to accomplish today. So this is going to be to go over the pre-post test gains pages. So with Teams Release 5.3, we made some aesthetic changes that you guys are probably noticing as you're doing your data entry and getting your new program year set up and getting all your participants entered. You've probably seen these changes. And what I hope to accomplish today is kind of go through the why and then the what, meaning what specific changes were made. So I think it'll be really beneficial to you and maybe help answer some of the questions that you have. So some of the back-end changes that we've made are really to align the functionality that we have and can see in Teams to the way that we have been calculating performance all along. So we had sort of a disconnect between what you could see in Teams and how you were really seeing participants in Teams in terms of their gains and their performance and how that performance is shared across the state. And you really just couldn't see it. So we wanted to make sure that whatever information you're seeing in Teams is really aligned to how we are calculating performance at the state level. So one of those two big things, and what this really meant, was the initial placement for NRS reporting. So individuals, and this is how we kind of calculate all of this. So individuals are really placed into educational functioning levels for reporting purposes for the program year on one of these following conditions. It's either the lowest initial test score if all content areas are taken on the same day. So if you take a TABE and you give them reading, math, all on the same day, all content areas, we're going to pick the lowest initial test score, okay? And that's how we will report them federally. If that is not applicable because of staggered testing options or something like that, pulling forward an old test, we'll go through that today. It's going to be the earliest test score available in the program year, given all the new flexibilities that we've provided in the assessment guide. So that's sort of how things initially get placed. And that means a lot because, as you guys know, that initial educational functioning levels in Teams help to establish sort of what we're looking for in terms of post-testing, right? When do we post-test? On what instruments do we post-test? In what content areas? All of those things. Now, we also removed the domain of significance, which is huge. We had domain of significance in Teams forever, but we have not been calculating performance, in the last 6 years based off of domain of significance. We got rid of that. So really any gain in any content area is a gain for performance. And we want you to be able to see it just like we're calculating it. Makes a lot of sense. So some of the changes that we had in the system are, to that effect, so you guys can see it. Now, I'm going to go over two kind of very specific scenarios that I want you guys to keep in mind for today's training. And as we move into the live portion here at the end of the webinar. So two scenarios. This first one is really showing how you can pull forward an old test to be used as a baseline in a new program year. Okay, so in this particular example, and this is straight out of the assessment guide, which is why some of the dates and the fact that it says 150 days probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So just know that we allowed 365 days for test expiration due to COVID-19. So instead of being able to pull forward a test from the last program year for 150 days, we can go all the way back to 365 days. But the important part, I think, in terms of program management and how you guys are looking at individual test scores locally, is to know when was the last test provided to a student in the instrument group that you are utilizing for that individual. So in this particular example, let's just say this is a TABE test. You will have a person that comes in and they pre-test on that TABE in reading, math, and language all at the same time. And then they take a post-test, but they only take a post-test in one subject area, right? What happens is when that student moves into the next program year and you go to register that individual for a class, Teams is going to pull something called a progress calculator, and it's going to check back and it's going to say, is there a test available based off of the test instrument that you chose during class registration? So if you chose a TABE test, it's going to look back and say, are there any TABE tests within the last 365 days in any content area that I can pull forward to be utilized as an initial test in that content area for that test instrument in the current program year that you're registering that student for class? And if the answer to that question is yes, it's going to pull that forward. So in this particular scenario, it's basically looking back and it's saying the only one that's eligible is reading. So that would be the only test that it would pull forward. Now I'm going to show you sort of how that looks now on the pre-post test gains pages in Teams, because in this particular scenario, the only test you would see on the pre-post test gains pages is this reading test, because it is the only one that is eligible, okay? So that means that you still would have to be looking at mathematics and language, right? They still need to have some sort of assessment in mathematics and language unless you have some sort of exception in the file for not, needing to test them in math and language for that program year, which is an allowable thing in the assessment guide as well. So this is sort of one example, which is really looking back and just Teams making a determination of which test based off of how you register that student for class and what instrument you choose, it will bring those tests forward. Now, if we're thinking about it from a performance perspective, this is something else I want everybody to kind of think about in terms of performance. Now, one thing in the last example that we did not show was really the performance related to any of this, right? So I want to kind of consider and look at this in comparison to performance. So what you see here is a period of participation for a student that crosses over 2 program years, right? The student begins their time with us, July, they take a pre-test. It could be a pre-test in all areas, on a TABE, on a CASAS, whatever test it was, but they take a pre-test in July. They continue to participate for that program year, and then around April, a post-test is made. That post-test for PY, let's just say PY 1920, so last year, is applied, and the MSG that is a result of that test is applied in program year 1, okay? Because what we know about a POP that spans across 2 program years is that you need an MSG in each of those program years. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, and you want to be looking at how the tests are sort of working in the system so that you know exactly like what is going on. Because what we typically see in the data is that there's a lot of over-testing. So I want to make sure everybody kind of understands the way that, this works from a performance perspective. So that post-test that this individual took in April, let's just assume that they made a gain in at least one content area on that post-test. that gain is applied for year one, program year one. Yay, great for them. They continue into the program. They continue to accumulate contact hours past April, all the way through to now we're getting up on July of the next program year. So you can see here it says class start date, and it's pointing to July. So the student starts, and what we know is like, bam, July hits. Now we're in a new program year. But to the student, it doesn't matter because they're just participating, right? The program year for us and having to build out that new program year is just something that happens in teams. It has no bearing on the student's activities up to that point. So when you register that student for a class in July and you're pulling up and you're saying, okay, we've got all the students coming in, this is who's dedicated to coming back, and you're trying to determine whether or not they need a test at the beginning of that program year, the first thing that you would want to do is pull the MSG report and see what is the number of days that this student had a test in the previous program year. So if the test is still valid in the system, there's no reason to kind of reestablish that testing at the first time they come back to class. You can just start them in class in July, utilizing a test instrument that's available. So let's say this post-test for PY 1920 is a TABE test. When they come back in July and you register them for a class and you select, again, TABE as the instrument group, it is going to bring forward that test from April to be used as the initial test and the placement test for the second program year. Now, what you'll see here on the image is that all the hours that have been accumulated for that test are now applied even in that second program year. So all the hours between April are now pulled forward and applied in the second program year, because the test publisher's guidelines are hours between tests, not hours between tests based off program years or, oh, you got to start over at the beginning of a program year. It's just hours between tests. You've applied the test in the second program year. Now all the hours since April come with it. So typically that would mean you have a lot less time in that second program year that person has to be in class before they've reached those minimum hours that are required. So in this particular example, we can see these accumulated hours ever since April. And then right at September, we're able to provide a post-test for that second program year. The person makes a gain off of that post-test, and then that gain is applied to the second program year. So this is really just to show you again in terms of performance, how the testing works and how you can utilize a post-test as a pre-test in a second program year if the student's period of participation remains open. So I know that's a lot of information, and you probably have some questions coming through in the chat, and I will get to them. So I want you to kind of think about those two scenarios as we kind of work through the rest of the PowerPoint here. Kind of keep those in mind. So the changes that we made in Teams were really to be able, at a grantee level, to see those two scenarios played out on a statewide scale. So that means that as a grantee locally, you will be able to see if there's another grantee that is providing any kind of test instrument to a student, what is that test instrument, and what the results of that test instrument were, which is huge because in the past you could only see what you were doing. And a lot of times we have students that, are participating in multiple grant locations. So now you kind of have access to see it all. So on the test summary page, this used to be called the assessment page. It's now called the test summary page. And the reason for that is because we chocked it full of all the tests. It's exactly what the page says. It's literally a summary of all the tests. And then within that page, we broke out those tests and we put them sort of into groups. So I'm going to go over those. So the first table you're going to see on the group, and this is just an example out of the training environment, is called Performance Report Test Summary. I'm calling this the high level. So if you just want to know for an individual student, you can go to that student's participant record, pull up their test summary, and you will be able to see over the course of time what specific instruments that they are utilizing. You will be able to see on this first report or this first table at the top, high level, whether or not that individual made an EFL gain in that program year. That's it. It's very high level. When you want to get down to more specific information, you can look at the performance report test table, which is right below it. And these have all the tests that are listed by specific dates, instruments. You can see the test level, you can see the scale scores, you can see the EFLs. So this one is more, I think, aligned to what you're used to seeing on this particular page in the past, which is really just what's happening with the student in a chronological order. Now, the one thing you don't see, or that's not showing you on this particular image, is that there's also a third table at the bottom, and that is the other test table. The other test table includes any non-NRS approved assessments or test. So this could be if you are utilizing, for instance, a HiSET practice test or a GED practice test or a TABE locator, or you're having to apply a non-NRS assessment because you, for whatever reason, cannot give the student a actual approved NRS test, you're going to find the results of those entries at the very bottom under other test. The reason why these two that you see highlighted here, both the high level and the specific by date, is because these are the tests that are included when we are thinking about performance. Okay, these are the only ones that count. Other things don't count. These are the ones that count, which is why we have put performance in front of the names there. So the other big change that we made is to the participant page classes. So used to, on the participant page, what you would see is a very simple, at the bottom, a list of classes that that student was enrolled in for that particular program year. It included just very basic information like class name, the instrument group, begin date, and end date. What we wanted to do is give you a little bit more robust information there. And we also wanted to make sure that you knew when a student was enrolled at another entity in that program year, because it gives a whole new sort of lens in terms of the data that we're being able to use. And guys, if we ever do move towards like supportive services like transportation or childcare or needs-based payments or something like that, it is going to be very important that you guys know where that student is receiving services outside of your area, right? Because you don't want to give like double transportation. We don't want to give double childcare. We have to have some good information available to us in our data system so that you guys can make good decisions programmatically at the local level. So for this particular individual, what you're seeing here is that, you know, they basically were going to classes in Abilene ISD as well as Angelina. Now, I don't know if they have a Learjet getting them from Abilene to Angelina. Maybe they do. I don't judge. But you can at least see it. So when something comes up like this and it makes you scratch your head, well, then it's going to make us scratch our head too, right? It's like, that's an anomaly, right? That's really weird. How is that happening? But all data is good data because it just helps to support the decisions that you're making locally. So this particular person, you know, Angelina College, Abilene ISD, they've had every test, I think every NRS test available to them aside from a couple. They've had a BEST Plus, a TABE, and a CASAS, right? It's also going to tell you the direct, proxy, and training hours that this individual has accumulated. And it's going to tell you whether or not the class that you're seeing here is a non-NRS approved class or not. So this is just little things that we've added to help you guys, you know, better manage, you know, testing. Does the student need to get an NRS approved test? Are they counting in performance? Are they not? Those types of things. And this is what it looks like, where you can actually probably see it much better. So why did we really make this change? So I've kind of already talked about some of these, but really I think for me, I wanted to make sure that you guys had access to information as we are calculating it. You know, we want to hold you accountable for your performance. In order to do that, you need to have access to that information and be able to see it in real time, just like we see it here at the state level. It's very difficult. And I'll tell you the other thing. So somebody's, a lot of folks have been asking, like, we need more reports. We need more reports. And I'm like, I know. I really do understand that. What has made the report so difficult is the fact that the tables on the back end were not built the way they needed to be built for us to easily pull data. So making these types of changes kind of help us to get the tables and the data sort of straightened out and aligned to how performance actually works. And that makes developing reports much easier. That's why the POP report and the MSG report just took so long to do, because we essentially had to build a report and tell the system, forget all the business rules that you have in there right now. We want you to do it this way instead. It just makes things much more complicated. So the other thing that was a pretty big change, I think, in terms of the pre-post test gains pages is the program year option. So we've included a lot more information here. You can select the program year just as you always have been able to do that. It is going to tell you the test given by grant recipient. So if you do have multiple grant recipients that are working with a student and are establishing, baselines using different test instruments and things like that, it's going to show up here. You're going to be able to see it. D plus P hours between tests and then days between tests are calculated by the instrument group and content area. So you'll notice here on this example that the D plus P hours for the CASAS math goals is different than the D plus P hours for the CASAS reading goals. Why is that? And the reason why that is because of time between tests in that content area. So this individual earned more hours between the CASAS reading goals test, pre and post test, than they did in the CASAS math goals test. Very simple. It's just time between test for instrument group in that content area. Same thing with days between tests. It works exactly the same way. It's based off of today's date. It'll update every single day, but it is still based off of instrument group and content area, not just instrument group alone. One thing I did want to point out that you guys probably have already noticed is that at the last two columns here that say made gain and then program year gain applied. The made gain column, if you see an NA, what that is telling you is that that is the baseline for that instrument group in that specific content area. So for the CASAS math goals, what it's saying is that test that was taken on 7-3 is acting as the baseline for CASAS math, just that content area. Same as the CASAS reading goals. The one that was brought forward from last program year from 9/2/2019 is acting as the established reading baseline. So that it's not really a big change, but again, I think it's just something you didn't really see because of domain of significance in Teams, because it always just kind of showed you that the lowest domain regardless. And now we're essentially establishing sort of a baseline or an initial test per content area. So it definitely looks a little different. And you guys will notice that as you're working in there. The program year gain applied is very simple. If it says yes and it says program year gain applied, all it's telling you is that the result of that test made a gain. So they took a test and they made a gain off of that test, and then what program year that test was applied when we're talking about measurable skills gains. Pretty simple. The pop view is so this is something also that's brand new. So on the pre-post test gains page, you now have an option to select a period of participation for a student. So in this particular one, when I select the drop down for periods of participation, look at all the periods of participation that this student has had. Probably because she's my training environment student, and I put a lot of stuff in there. Which is probably why she exits all the time, because I kind of go in there and do some things and then I forget about her. So, but now you get to kind of select those periods of participation. And then once you do that, you're going to be able to see all the tests that have occurred in any instrument, in any content area over a span of time, even if that span of time is 2 years, even if that span of time is 18 months, even if that span of time is 3 years, however long that period of participation is for that student, you're going to be able to see what the student accomplished in terms of pre-post test gains. So I think and you can also export that. So this whole page, actually, you can export it. You can export the program year, you can export the period of participation view if that's what you want. So you can actually take this information out of the system and analyze it further if you want to. Future releases, and I think we're right on time here. Good. So future releases, I wanted to get you guys excited about some things that are happening here in the near future. When I say near future, I'm saying I'm hoping these things happen by the end of the program year. This is sort of what you can expect. We are working on doing profiles aligned to periods of participation. So now those profiles will be kind of developed based off of initial program entry, and then they will get locked. And nobody will be able to kind of mess with them, because we don't want that information to be messed with kind of after program entry. We want it to be a snapshot in time, which is really the program entry of the student. And then we don't want it kind of messed with, because we want to see what the student is able to sort of accomplish and sort of, where they were at program entry versus what happens whenever they exit. So this is all data that we right now, we're kind of in non-compliance, to be honest, because that's how we're supposed to be capturing it, not on a program year basis, which means that you'll no longer have to update a profile every program year unless the person's period of participation, is no longer active and they've exited. So that's a good thing. It'll save you guys some time, hopefully. Then we have several what I'm calling data validation bugs. These are bugs that are going to do things like this. You can't give someone a high school equivalency voucher if you're saying on their profile that they already have a high school diploma. That's a data validation check that we need to have in the system, right? You can't give someone a workforce measurable skills gain if they're not attached to a training service, right? Because that's the policy and that's what we require. So those are types of things that just help to really create a lot of integrity in our data. And they're very slight changes to you guys, but it's important that you know about them. And we'll be doing obviously some webinars and things about that. We're going to update the Pearl. This is probably not good news for you guys, but we're missing a couple of Pearl elements. So all that information that you guys collect at enrollment, it probably seems like a lot because it is. We actually have a few more that we should be asking for. So we will be updating both our policy and our guidance, which Fabiana is working on and my team is working on. And then we have to update teams. The goal is always to get the policy out at the same time that the team's update happens, because I know that's what makes your life easier. It's not making it easier if we put the policy out too early and you make the changes, but then you can't put them in the system or vice versa. So our goal there is that those things will come out at the same time. We're also creating a participant note page. Think of it kind of like a counselor's note. So you guys will be able to actually go in and put in your exception information or any exemptions that you're applying or conversations that you're having with students. You'll be able to kind of put all of that into the system so that as students move and relocate or go in and out of program, you're doing follow-up activities, all of those things. You can now document that in an actual digital file in Teams. with the student. Yay, that's a good thing. And then obviously reports enhancement. This is going to be a pretty long project for us, but it is already in the works, and it is happening, as well as the Tableau, which is still happening as well. And then other future enhancements that probably won't happen this year. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know yet if we're going to be able to accomplish them. But one is the merge participant records. That's a big one because, as you guys know, we have a lot of duplicate records in Teams. The merge participant records is going to allow us at the state level to merge those profiles. And hopefully, we'll be able, just again, with data accuracy and integrity, those are things that are going to help us. We're also going to develop an iTech page that you can create and modify an iTech plan in Teams, so you can do it in Teams, you can print it out if you want, fill it out, whatever. But you'll be able to update that into in Teams and not just a paper copy in the file. The last one is really, really big, and it's probably going to be a big project for someone, not myself, because would never have time to do this. But we are going to be looking at our local user admin management. So we are looking at options to basically put a layer of oversight and control on who has access to student information with you guys, to kind of say, well, Jane Doe needs access to the system, and providing you the capability to manage that at the local level, or at least at a minimum, pull a report that says these are all the people that have access to grantee data. So we're still working on sort of fine-tuning all of that, but that's going to be a really big project and a big system change in Teams. Okay, so the rest of these, I think I just kind of went over these. You can look at them, but I'm going to pause here before we go into the live environment and see if there are any questions out there.
Okay, yes, there have been some questions, so I'm going to go back up from Mrs. Johnson. Does the existing test data update itself as the new baseline, or does it remain locked with a lock icon?
It will. I may be able to answer that question when I do this live training, but I want to make sure I understand what she is asking. If the icon says that it's locked, what that means is that it is either in a locked reporting year, which means you can't mess with it, delete it, edit it, or anything else, or the test information was entered by someone by someone outside of your grantee area. That's what the little lock icon means. Either way, if it does have a lock icon, it just means that you can't update it or modify it.
Risa asked, does this mean Teams can now count accumulated test hours across the program years?
Yes.
Kelsey Woodward, and I think she answered herself, but I'm going to go ahead and say this. On the test summary screen page, can the assessment history be added back versus having to pull an MSG or POP report? And then she mentions the screen may be showing while you decide to make the change to participant page.
I would probably say send that one to me in an email. And the only reason I say that is because I want to make sure I understand the question. Because the second table that's in there, which is the performance reports, which is that specific date data, it's basically the same as what used to be in there. It's just a chronological list of all the tests that are provided to that student. So send me your question in an email, because I may just not be kind of understanding the ask there.
Okay. Another question back to screen number 1. Did you say the test would not carry forward if they did not have an MSG in the previous program year, or did I misunderstand?
That is, I'm glad you asked that question, and I meant to make that a point when I was talking about it. It doesn't matter if they made an MSG or they didn't. It's just a test. So the progress calculator is always just going to look back at whatever the test is. It doesn't care if that post-test led to a gain or it didn't. It's just going to pull forward whatever is there. based off of the class registration instrument? Good question.
Okay. Then a comment about I like the change, but I miss being able to see the historical classes at a glance. And that was echoed by a few people. All right. Another question. What if a participant has a high school diploma from another country and wants to get HSE in the US? Can that participant get a GED voucher if it is marked have a high school diploma in Teams?
Right now, and I'd have to look at the policy that we are rolling out, but I think what we have said is that it's basically if they already have a high school diploma or equivalency in the US. And that is what we're building into Teams in terms of that data validation check. So if it's outside of the US, then, you're not going to have any issues. But I would just say, look at the policy when it comes out and make sure that, that scenario is, that you look in the policy for that scenario.
Okay.
And if anybody is out there on my team, write that down and make sure that we can address that in the policy.
Lots of good echoing for the iTech page. Will the notes page be exportable?
Yes.
Okay.
Be exportable, and you'll be able to do it by a date range.
Excellent. How will the test be affected between programs when someone else gives a test and the hours were not met?
It'll just show up. So right now, you guys already know this, but the report that is basically the early testing report is out of whack. It's one of the things that we would need that we're going to modify and update. But at that time, when that happens, you'll be able to see it on the report if a person was tested early, regardless of who did the testing.
Okay. Are we going to be able to see who administered the test at a provider level? It would help the consortia immensely.
Yeah, that's always a tough one, and we get that a lot with the staff as well, like staff at a provider level. Right now, I don't even know how we would do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, nothing's impossible, but it does mean that whenever you add an assessment into Teams, we would have to just include at that point, a drop down to select the provider within that grant recipient, or we would have to sort of add something to that page. So I'm going to write that one down because I don't think that would be too hard to do, and then we would just have to update the tables to reflect provider level, but I'm going to write that one down.
Okay. Another comment is, can class number be added back to classes section?
Yes.
Okay. To go along with the exporting the note page, somebody's asking, will we be able to import into the notes page?
Oh, that would be a nice feature. It would be, and it's not impossible. I will look at that and I'll add that to the design document for that.
Okay. And then the last question, if a student has a BPO exit level and a best literacy intermediate level, what should we do when the student needs a progress test? In a regular year, we can post-test the student best literacy. During COVID-19, what are your suggestions?
Well, that's a tough one. And my suggestions would probably be, as much as you're not going to like them, is to test them on another instrument. Because you're essentially, unless they can meet some other measurable skills gain within that year, then you're essentially kind of pigeonholed and they're just not going to, or you have to be comfortable with the fact that they're just not going to make a measurable skills gain. Depending on how many people that you have in that scenario, which you can pull, the measurable skills gain report and kind of get a feel for that to know what the impact is locally. Those are decisions that you guys have to make. What is the impact going to be? How many people do you have that sort of fall within that? And is it worth it to switch to a different test instrument for those individuals? And then what are some of the limitations with the remote testing and everything else related to that? If not, then the only other option is to get them a different MSG or not get them an MSG at all.
Right. Teams is not allowing for a baseline assessment to be entered in the new program year if the student exit out in a post-test in the last program year. Is this new in Teams?
It may be scenario based. So one thing I will tell you guys, we had a couple after this deployed, we had a couple little issues with being able to add contact hours to classes. And this may be the same for this scenario. And if you don't think it is, send it to me in the Teams technical assistance box and we'll work through it. But I want to remind everybody out there, especially if you're a data entry person or you're new to Teams, this is the best advice I can give you, honestly, to not pull your hair out. Do everything in sequential order based off of date. So I know with the new school year kind of opening late, you may be coming into a situation where you got a stack of papers on your desk and you're trying to just get them data entered, but take the time to put those things into a chronological order and enter them that way. Because everything about Teams is built on chronological time clock. And if you don't do it that way, and let's just say, the students got, had a test in July and they took another one in September, and then you try to enter the September one, even though the July one is there and should be counted, it will mess everything up. So we've had a couple of instances where, things just weren't entered chronologically based off of the date or sequentially. So we've had to go back in and kind of back out a lot of stuff and then kind of start over from scratch. I don't know if that's the particular issue with this one, but send it in to us and then we'll do the research on our end. So let me do this. I want to show you a couple of things in the training environment, and then I will try to answer questions at the end. And I don't think I have anything after this, so I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions that you guys may have that we haven't gotten to, because I always try to build in, and I apologize, we need to start probably making these an hour and a half, just because there is a lot of good questions that come in. So this is a person in the training environment. So this is this is what Teams looks like. This is a participant. Her name's Tina Tishner. And this is her sort of participation page. Now, one thing I want you guys to notice, you guys have very limited access. I do not, because I have super admin. So I'm able to kind of, change my grant recipient, which is good because it allows me to show you everything. So for Tina, I'm going to say that Tina is coming into this Texas South grant recipient, and she is registering for classes. Currently, when I look at her test summary page, if this is, let's just pretend that this is July 1st and Tina's coming into the system and she's coming back for classes. I can look in here and I can see all of the tests that Tina has in the system currently. I can see that the training grant recipient, who isn't me, provided Tina with a TABE test back in September of 2008, and they also provided her a TABE test in September of 2019. I can see that for Texas South grant recipient, again, that's who I am, Texas South grant recipient, well, we're giving her the CASAS. So what I know about Tina is that she has a TABE test and she has a CASAS reading test. Both of those, if she was starting class in July 1, are eligible based off of the 365 days, right? That's what I know by looking at Tina. But here at the Texas South grant recipient, we only use CASAS. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add Tina to a class to show you, and actually before I do that, what I want to show you is this new pre-post test gains pages. So when I'm looking at the program year, it's blank. And the reason for that is because Tina has not been registered for any classes in this program year. And until she is, there will be no pre-post test. There will be no tests that show on the pre-post test gains pages. The class registration is what notifies the system that this individual is participating. And at that point that it's going to pull forward any test. Okay, so it doesn't automatically pull forward because, again, if you'll remember the scenarios that we went through at the beginning of the session, it's all really based off of participation. So until Teams is sort of aware that she plans on participating, it's not going to pull forward any old test. So I am going to register Tina for a class under my grant recipient. This is where everything comes to fruition, guys. The class registration page is going to determine what test instrument I am using to determine Tina's pre-post test gain for the program year, right? For this grant recipient. Now, the options, as I showed them to you, there's actually a CASAS test that's available. There's also a TABE test that's available. So remember when I said Texas South, we don't really use the TABE test, but we're thinking about transitioning to the TABE test, or maybe we use both. We use CASAS and TABE. That creates some flexibility here. I can either say, okay, I'm going to pull forward the CASAS instrument, or I can say I'm going to pull forward the TABE instrument. I have options because Tina has both of those test instruments that are sort of there, and they are valid because they are within 365 days and they are at a level where they can show progress. Since we use CASAS here at Texas South, that is what I'm going to select. I'm going to register Tina for a class July 1st. When I do that and I hit the save button, it's going to pull up this little note. And all this note says is it's basically giving you more information. It's just saying like, hey, by the way, this individual has these other NRS approved tests that are eligible for an initial assessment for this program year because it meets the criteria. Less than 365 days and they can make a gain. Okay, that's all it's telling you. Click OK. And now, now that Tina is registered for a class, when you go to the pre-post test gains pages, now you're looking and you're seeing what tests were brought forward. And now this is telling you that you can now give a post test for CASAS reading goals when the person achieves enough hours, and it could count as a post test, right? This is the test based off of the class registration information that was available. So it brought it forward, okay? If, and I'm gonna go back here, and now you can see that this individual has been registered for a class, right? Now I wanna show you if I change this, and let's say I'm another grant recipient that's working with this individual. Okay. And now I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, I can see that she's participating with another grantee. But Tina also wants to come to classes with us. And I look at the test summary page, and now I can see that this CASAS reading goal is part of the 2021 performance test, which means I know that it's in there and it can be used, but I just don't use CASAS, right? We don't use CASAS here. So I'm going to have to register for her for a class based off of the test instrument that I can post test her on. Okay, makes sense. So when I go to Tina and now I'm going to register her for a class under this second grant recipient, and I'm going to select TABE. And when I save this, now when I go to this pre-post test gains page for Tina, it has now applied all of the eligible tests in chronological order based off of not only test instrument, but also content area. And I'm just showing this to you guys just because I don't want you to be shocked like when it happens, or, typically this is kind of a non-typical scenario. But we do actually have a lot of people that fall into this when we're just looking at the data on the back end. So now Tina has basically two different test instruments that can be made for post-test gains. So what I really want you guys to know and understand about how the performance works is that and I'm just going to add some hours in here just because, well, it's the right thing to do. So when I go in and let's just say I'm adding hours for Miss Tina here, the hours are still attached to the test instrument for that class. And I don't know if that was the question from before, it may have been. So what I want to do is show you that whenever I add these hours, it is going to attach those hours in terms of the pre-post test gains page to the actual test instrument used for that class registration. It's not going to attach them up here to the TABE test, okay? Because that's not the test instrument that I'm telling teams that we're using for purposes of measuring instruction. I'm telling teams at class registration that it's the CASAS, right? But what I want you to know and kind of understand is that since Tina is a participant, let's just say she is participating at both of these grantees, if I go, and I should have picked the other one because I'm horrible at knowing what my CASAS test results are. So let's just say that I'm with this Texas South grant recipient. So I have to change this again. You guys don't have to deal with any of this, but I do because I'm going between grant recipients. So now I'm saying, okay, Tina has accumulated 56 hours. She's ready for a post test, right? I brought forward this old test from 2019, but she accumulated 40 hours in July. So she's ready for a post test just based off of hours between tests. So I am going to go here and I'm going to add a test. And I'm going to put down this CASAS reading. I'm going to say here at the end of July, I'm going to add scores. And this is where I get really terrible, guys, because I don't know the scores for CASAS. So I'm going to make a guess. Oh, yay. Perfect. Okay, so I'm saving this test. Now when I go to the pre-post test gains pages, you'll notice that this is now applied for the program year. But what I want you guys to understand is that if you are sharing a participant, meaning there is someone that is showing up on your POP report or they are showing up on your local MSG reports, if another grant recipient that they're working with achieves a gain, you achieve a gain. That's the way the performance works. It doesn't matter. So if I go to this educational outcome screen, what I'm going to notice right now, and this is a change, a future change that we're making, what you're going to notice right now is two of these. The reason for that is because Teams knows that this level gain is being applied to two grant recipients. So even though she took a post test on CASAS and maybe the training grant recipient uses TABE, that is a participant that made a gain, and Teams is going to give both grantees that are working with that participant credit for that gain, regardless. In the future, what you're going to see is you'll see one row like this, and then there'll be another column at the side, and it's going to say training grant recipient, Texas South grant recipient. It'll say Dallas and Tarrant and Elcott. Whoever that participant has touched within that period of participation and have established, and they're showing on your POP report, That means if they get a gain anywhere, anyhow, everybody gets credit for that gain. So that's kind of important for you guys, I think, to know. And it should also help you to work. If a student is moving out of your area and they're moving to another area, make that warm handoff with the other, AEL grant recipient. It's only going to help you in the end because you'll both get credit for the work that you've done with that student. So I wanted to make sure that you guys kind of knew that that's how everything worked. Okay, so I'm going to stop.
Okay, I am going to back up to Taylor Creel. I think that was the last where I had stopped with my questions. So will there be any webinars or guidance on the employment outcomes page?
Yes, so I did one, and I think that Maria Morrow on my team actually has one scheduled for next week. I don't know if she's going to be going over the employment outcome screen in Teams with that one. So there's already one out there that we've done, and I'm happy to share that with you, Taylor. But we can certainly do whatever you guys need. If y'all want us to do one on the employment outcomes in Teams, let's do it. I will write it down right now and get it on the books.
Okay. All right. Okay, back to the questions. If they test out, they cannot be entered into a class, so they miss out on hours. I guess that's a comment.
Yes. Guys, if they test out of like a ESL instrument and they test out, and let's say you can't give them the best literacy, that is a tough bag right now, because if you want the hours to sort of count towards a pre-post test, then they have to have a pre-test to which they can make a gain off of. So you either have to switch to another ESL based test like CASAS, Life and Works, or you've got to move them into, an ABE norm test. Or you can do a non-NRS test and just know that, there's not going to be any real MSG for that individual.
Will we ever be able to count students' foreign credential evaluation as an MSG? Thought it might be worth a shot to ask.
Very doubtful. Very doubtful.
Okay. And this kind of goes along with what you just answered. Can TABE Level E be an option to use for progress for best literacy? Will it take it as a progress?
It will not take it as a progress right now because it's not an NRS approved option for ESL assessment.
Okay. Will the Teams update also allow to export data entries into Career and Training Services tab?
Wait, say that one more time, Krista.
Okay, sorry. Will the Teams update also allow to export data entries into Career and Training Services tab?
Export data entries into Career and Trainings tab. I'm not sure I understand that one. I may need some additional information, guys, for that one. If that's your question, maybe re-ask it or.
Okay, I'll watch for that. That was from Liz, so I'll rewatch. Okay. Somebody says, can you explain again about having a GED from another country?
I think that what the question was is, can you, they were asking with the voucher program that's coming out, if you have someone that has achieved their maybe their high school diploma from another country, but they just want to get a high school equivalency that is based out of the U.S. For whatever reason, is that allowable? And what I said was, wait till the policy comes out. I'm going to make sure that we address that in the policy, but I need to confer with my staff in terms of what our thoughts are there.
Okay. Can a column be added to the non-validated classes report to show supervisor validated date?
I'm writing it down. And I'm glad you guys are kind of asking well, can we get this? Can we get that? We do have sort of a running list of enhancements that have been requested from the field that we do keep. I will say that I think after the end of this program year, or probably Yeah, I'm gonna say at the end of this program year, we'll have all the really big stuff done in terms of getting teams aligned to WIOA, which allows us a little bit more time to work on some of the enhancements that just, help to make your lives easier, which is great. I don't mind working those and doing those. So send them in, Teams Technical Assistance. If you do have enhancements, we are keeping a record of those. Blanca's keeping them. And then I use those whenever we have our conversations with IT. We'll put the bug in and then we'll work it based off of priority. So sometimes those things get shifted around quite a bit if there is an actual glitch in the system, but I'm happy to learn of any enhancements that you guys want.
Okay. Can you tell me where the POP view report is found?
The POP view report, well, there's two things. So, okay. If you want the report, again, go to reports, participants, and then periods of participation. It's going to bring you to this page. You can fill this out, and then you have an option to run a summary report or a report extract. You can also filter this all the way down to the class level. So if you're an instructor and you just want to pull participants for your class, you can do that. Site, provider, you have filterable options there.
All right. Wouldn't it be a bit much to put a student through so many tests just because I can't test her tape? Could she not be entered into our class with a CASAS from a different provider? Would our hours count towards that test as well?
Yes. The difficulty, and this is something to consider, I think, guys, at the local level. Again, I don't know how many people we have that sort of crossover grant recipients within a program year or a period of participation. We haven't dug into it like extensively, but it does happen, and it may happen more often than we think. So to answer your question, that's kind of the whole reason why we wanted to show you the student at the student's level, because sure, if they have a CASAS from another grant recipient and you want to use that test as a baseline for your grant recipient, you can do that. Absolutely, you can do that. All you do is register them for the class based off of that test instrument, and it's going to pull it from the participant's record. So we've got to stop thinking about things like on a grantee specific level. It's all about the participant level. So you can do that. What becomes an issue, I think, sometimes is the fact that most grant recipients use one or the other. So when it comes to the post-test, now you have to give that individual a post-test on whatever that instrument group is that you chose. So if another grant recipient gave them a CASAS and you want to use that as your test instrument, that's fine. You can do that. But you have to be very cognizant of the post-test. So if you don't use CASAS in your area, you only use TABE, how are you going to give that CASAS post-test? That's the question. So many of you may be using both, but I think most of you kind of select one or the other.
All right. To verify students' hours to determine eligibility for post-testing, we should look only at pre-post test gains and not summary.
Correct.
So if I have a student that has a test from CASAS, but we do not use CASAS, it would be like she has no test on file. I would administer a new test TABE, which is what we use, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's see. Isn't that testing the student too much? Do I then still test or not since she gets a gain?
Oh, are you saying like you already made a gain by another grant recipient?
It's possible.
Well, that's a really good question. Actually, I'd like if you'd send that one into ALTA, because we like to track all the, kind of complex things if we want to throw them in our FAQ. I think that's a good one for us to ponder.
Okay. What is the best report to pull for post-testing eligible students now? Go to pre-post gains, MSG, where?
If you're just trying to figure out like students that need a post-test that don't have a gain, the best report to use is the MSG management report. And you can find that, go to reports, and then again to participants, because it is a participant level report, and then go down to the MSG management report and pull that. And that's going to tell you that all the tests that are basically everything that's on the pre-post test gains page for that participant at a participant level. I will say that this one also has a very crispy summary. The summary is great. If you're just wanting to get in there and like, man, just tell me who needs something. I just need to know like who needs an MSG. If that's the information that you're seeking at any given day, Sundays, Mondays, whatever day, and you want just in time, pull the MSG management report, pull the summary, and that's going to show you. And anywhere there's a blank in there, those are students that have no measurable skills gains attached to them.
Okay. Where do we have that report for all students to show MSG? The MSG Manage report does not show me any gains.
You have to pull the report extract, and then you'll be able to see if there is a gain applied. Or the summary will show you too.
If we have a student that has post-tested in one subject coming back from 1020, do we have to test on all three subjects, or can we post-test hours met in that subject again for 2021?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to repeat that one.
Okay, and she actually clarified herself from program year 1920. Okay, let me go back again. If we have a student that is post-tested in one subject coming back from program year 1920, do we have to test in all three subjects, or can we post-test hours met in that subject again for 2021?
You can post-test in the one subject based off of the hours accumulated since that test, if that was the only one that was brought forward. The assessment guide does require that you test in all areas. Now with COVID and everything going on, there is also an exception in the assessment guide if you don't want to have a pre-test in all areas. So if you choose to just bring forward maybe that one content area like we showed in the slide today, and due to COVID, there's just not an option or time available to do the remote testing for the other areas within the time frame that we've listed in the assessment guide, then you would have to make sure that there's an exception in the file to say why you didn't have any test in those other areas. But you could still pull the old test forward, post-test on that test, and get a gain off of that one content area.
Okay. I wasn't able to enter a test into Teams when today's date was past the 365 days, but the class start date was not. For instance, class started August 31st, 2020, and the last test was September 9th, 2019. But I was entering said class the 1st of October, but it wouldn't let me because it said the test was more than 365 days old.
Yeah, and it's probably just something that's happening there, like with the data entry part. Go ahead and send that one in to us, to the Teams technical assistance, and then we'll respond with sort of the detailed steps so that you can get it entered. We'll do a little analysis. Blanca loves doing analysis, by the way.
Okay. Also, will we ever be able to use a Best Plus 2.0 test that is an exited level to at least enter the student into class?
Probably not, because this just goes back to when we were talking about, so every year when we report our students, we have to place them in an initial level. The initial level that we place them in has to be based off of the fact that that person can make a gain, on that particular content area. So probably not. I'll look into it to see if there's anything like, are we being more restrictive, than the requirement? I don't mind looking into it, but, typically we wouldn't want an initial assessment of a student to not be able to make any progress for that.
Okay.
But I don't mind looking into it.
All right. This next question, I'm not sure. It was sent to me privately. The question is, can I wait on the other to do the CASAS post-test? That was from Alex Ripley. I'm not sure if that's enough information for the
I am not sure
All right.
what he means by that.
Alex, go ahead and re-ask your question, and I'm going to go on to you've got two more questions and then that one from Alex. So, right, isn't it better to enroll a student into class with an NRS test that student exited out of than to enroll them with a non-NRS approved test?
Well, it's the same result. So, and the reason why I say that, it's the same result, meaning that in both of those cases, the student cannot make a gain. So there's no post-test that you can give that student that they would make a gain on if they are at the highest that they can be on that particular NRS test, or that they are, basically in there on a non-NRS test. So for the purposes of, like performance, those are equivalent. The only other options for those students is not a post-test, but some other measurable skills gain, which if you're talking about, ESL tests, maybe they can do a Spanish GED if they're lacking that or something like that. There are other MSGs that are available, but in terms of post-testing, those things are kind of equivalent.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question, but just from a performance perspective.
Right, I think so, because Katerina came back and said, but they can get a different type of MSG and they will count towards the denominator.
Yes, this is true.
All right.
We'll be monitoring stuff like that, just so you guys know, like the NRS test, that's why we asked you to put them in a provisional level, so that, if they do get some other MSG, like a high school equivalency, or they exit and enter into post-secondary or something like that, that we'll still be able to capture those other MSGs that are non-test related. So I'm glad she asked that question.
All right. Two more questions. There seems to be an issue with pulling a POP with education profile variables. Any ideas for finding active ITPs with contact information?
Wait, say that again.
All right. There seems to be an issue with pulling a POP with education profile variables. Any ideas for finding active ITPs with contact information?
Yeah. That is an active glitch. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that is an actual glitch in the system, and it's already been reported, and we have a bug in for it.
All right. Excellent. All right, and then the last question, this is from Alex Ripley, redoing her question. It was regarding using other providers' tests for my student in the class. Mm-hmm. You said I needed to post-test them in CASAS, but what if I wait for the other provider to post-test them in CASAS, since it is their baseline already anyways?
Yeah, and that's a scenario like if that happens, and let's just say you don't supply the test and someone else does, and the gain is made, the performance is shared. What it doesn't do, and this is kind of where we get into, the requirements in terms of the assessment policy. And this is something maybe we need to look at this more holistically, for the assessment policy as well, because you have responsibilities, for testing based off of the assessment policy. The purposes of creating what we did in teams is so that we can see how that assessment policy is being applied to the student and not necessarily at a grantee level. So I think that's a very valid question. I don't know if I have an answer in terms of what you should do locally. I can just tell you that for the student, you would get credit for that student. So I understand like what you're saying is basically why over test them. If somebody else is already testing them and we can show that the instruction that they're getting is basically leading them to an outcome. So I'm going to write that one down because I think that's a really great question for us to explore.
Okay. Let's see. And Tara's asking, can the class number be added to the pre-post gain page?
Okay. I'll write that one down.
Okay.
Is that it?
That is it.
Awesome. Okay, guys, I am going to sign off here and head out to my next meeting. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather. Hopefully it's beautiful in your neck of the woods. And we will see you next time. Thanks for all the great feedback and the good questions, guys, as always.
All right. Thank you so much.